There is something genuinely electric building around this weekend in NASCAR, and at the same time, there is a cloud of uncertainty hanging over the whole thing that makes it impossible to ignore. A significant change is coming to one of the most unpredictable tracks on the entire Cup Series schedule, and nobody can say with confidence whether it is going to transform the racing or simply rearrange the same problems into a different order. That tension, that genuine unknown, is exactly what has the garage area buzzing and fans locked in ahead of Sunday. What makes this moment feel even bigger is that two major storylines are unfolding simultaneously, and they crash into each other in a way that raises the stakes considerably for everyone involved. NASCAR has officially announced a meaningful restructuring of the stage lengths for the Cup Series race at Talladega Superspeedway. This is not a minor adjustment around the edges. The original format would have followed a more conventional breakdown, but the new structure flips that entirely. Stage 1 will now run through lap 98, Stage 2 will conclude at lap 143, and the final stage will take the field to lap 188. That works out to 98 laps in the first stage, followed by two 45-lap stages to close out the race. The announcement came directly from John Probst, the Executive Vice President and Chief Racing Development Officer at NASCAR, who addressed it publicly on the Holler Talk podcast and gave a clear explanation of the thinking behind the decision. Probst described how NASCAR and the teams have been in ongoing conversations since the Daytona 500, specifically trying to address the fuel-saving dynamic that took over superspeedway racing earlier this season. He categorized the available solutions into two distinct areas. The first involves sporting changes, meaning adjustments to rules, pit stop procedures, and race structure like stage lengths. The second involves technical changes, which would mean actually modifying the car itself, including components like the spoiler and horsepower levels. The critical detail here is that teams expressed clear reluctance to pursue major technical changes in the middle of a season, because altering the car significantly carries real risk of creating unintended consequences that could affect competition in ways nobody wants. So NASCAR opted for the safer path and focused on restructuring the race format instead. The strategic logic behind the new stage layout is straightforward in theory. By keeping the final two stages short enough, NASCAR is trying to create a situation where drivers can run those closing segments without needing to make a fuel stop. The goal is to eliminate, or at least significantly reduce, the slow throttle management style of racing that frustrated so many fans at Daytona, where cars were running three wide but nobody was actually racing hard because everyone was conserving fuel. Probst also acknowledged that the long first stage could still become a strategy battleground, with some teams attempting a one-stop approach while others plan around two stops. If the two-stop group decides to push the pace aggressively, it could force the one-stop teams to respond and blow up their fuel conservation plans entirely, creating genuine unpredictability in the opening portion of the race. Kyle Busch, two-time Cup Series champion and one of the most candid voices in the sport, has made his position on these changes completely clear, and he is deeply skeptical that any of it will matter. Busch argued that regardless of how NASCAR structures the stages, crew chiefs are going to find a way to work the system. Teams are always searching for fuel-saving opportunities and always looking to put the minimum amount of fuel into the car during pit stops in order to gain a competitive advantage on pit road. That mentality does not disappear because the stage lengths have been rearranged on paper. His point carries real weight because NASCAR teams have consistently demonstrated an ability to adapt to rule changes faster than almost any other motorsport organization in the world. Busch went further and addressed the fundamental issue of how drivers actually gain positions at Talladega under the current package. His assessment was blunt. The primary way to move forward through the field is not by racing on the track itself, but by taking on less fuel during pit stops, getting out faster, and jumping other cars in the running order that way. When the field is running three wide and everyone is managing throttle input, there is simply no momentum available and no lanes opening up to make moves. Even when a driver tries to force a move, the aerodynamic characteristics of the current package tend to funnel cars into the bottom groove, making it extremely difficult to generate the kind of run needed to pass. From Busch's perspective, this is not a problem that stage length adjustments can solve because the issue runs much deeper into the racing dynamics themselves. The collision of these two stories creates a genuinely fascinating situation heading into Sunday at Talladega. NASCAR is trying something proactive, working collaboratively with teams, and deliberately avoiding the kind of drastic mid-season technical overhaul that could create bigger problems than it solves. On the other side, a veteran champion with decades of experience reading race situations is saying flatly that it will not work. Both positions are reasonable, and that is exactly what makes this race feel like something more than just another event on the schedule. In a very real sense, Talladega this weekend functions as a test case for NASCAR's approach to problem solving. If the restructured stages produce noticeably more aggressive racing and reduce the fuel management dynamic, it validates the idea that creative formatting changes can improve the product without touching the cars. If the racing looks essentially the same as it did at Daytona, the pressure on NASCAR to pursue those harder technical decisions is going to increase substantially. With the playoff picture beginning to take shape and teams accumulating stage points and wins that will define their postseason positioning, every race carries weight beyond its immediate result. The broader concern that Busch raised about passing being nearly impossible without pit road manipulation is arguably the more serious long-term issue. If the only reliable way to gain positions is through short filling on pit stops rather than actual on-track racing, that is a fundamental problem with the racing product that no amount of stage restructuring fully addresses. It speaks to how the current aerodynamic and horsepower package interacts with superspeedway racing in ways that limit the kind of organic, driver-driven action that makes these events compelling. There is genuine respect owed to NASCAR for responding to fan criticism and attempting a solution rather than defending the status quo. The fuel-saving complaints after Daytona were loud and widespread, and doing nothing would have been its own kind of statement. But skepticism about whether this particular fix goes deep enough is entirely justified. The teams and crew chiefs who operate at this level are extraordinarily good at finding and exploiting any available strategic edge, and shorter stages alone may not be sufficient to fundamentally change their behavior or the racing dynamics that produce it. The most likely outcome is somewhere in the middle. The restructured stages might introduce a bit more chaos, force some teams into uncomfortable strategic positions, and create a few more moments of genuine aggression late in the race. That could be enough to make Talladega feel different from Daytona without being a complete transformation of how superspeedway racing works. And at a place like Talladega, even a small increase in unpredictability can snowball into something memorable very quickly given the nature of restrictor plate racing. Sunday's race at Talladega Superspeedway, airing at 3 Dallas p.m. Eastern on Fox, now carries meaning well beyond the point standings. It is a referendum on NASCAR's willingness to experiment and an early indicator of whether the sport will need to pursue more significant structural changes to fix what is broken at its most chaotic venues.